like we've got pretty good participation. It's nice to see people interested in traffic topics and what we have to offer. I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the subject matter because it's cutting edge and brand new stuff that we're dealing with. You know, and I have to say it, people in my office have heard me say this in the past too, but you know, now that self-driving vehicles have become really popular and available out there, I think we should start calling them automobiles. I got a couple laughs, okay. Within my office, they've heard that way too often. That was my suggestion for the office name, actually, the Office of Automobiles, but that didn't fly too well. But anyway, it is my pleasure to abandon the lectern like I was told never to do in Toastmasters. But anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Jay Hippis, who's going to be our presenter today. Before moving into his current role of leading connected and automated vehicle efforts for MnDOT, Jay Hippis was a state traffic engineer. His other work experience includes leading MnDOT's alternative contracting, project management, and construction. He also worked for a consulting firm, at least one consulting firm that I'm aware of, two consulting firms, back in his home of Green Bay. And so I'm sure there's going to be a reference related to the Packers in here somewhere. I'm not positive. Oh, okay. Well, then that's all to our benefit. So anyway, help me welcome Jay Hippis to the lectern.
All right. Thanks, Ken. Thanks for having me today. Probably the biggest thing I can help answer is what the heck has Jay been doing for the past year? Because you probably haven't seen me too much of some of the traffic topics. So this will help explain what has kind of transpired. A lot of stuff has happened, actually. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. Kind of high-level overview, kind of like a little 101 for those of you that are kind of new to this area. Talk about some national trends, and there's a ton of work happening around the country. It's impossible to keep our arms around all the things that are going on the private side, on the public side. You know, cities and counties across the country are getting involved with this. States are getting involved. It's almost like a little competition between some of these public entities too on who can do the coolest thing and market it and showcase it a little bit. I'm going to talk about some of the traffic engineering things. You'll see that there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to connected and automated vehicles. There's a lot of speculation right now. There's a lot of thoughts, but not really anything concrete to move forward with. But some things are kind of moving forward. And lastly, I'm going to talk about what we're actually been doing here in Minnesota, both kind of on the testing side and also kind of on the policy side. So Ken mentioned that I'm the director of the CAVX. So this is a brand new office. So as about 2 weeks ago, I was a state traffic engineer. And with all the things that were happening with connected automated vehicles, and the governor signed an executive order about a month and a half ago, the workload increased enormously. So leadership came to me and said, it's way too much for one person to do the state traffic engineering job and try to move this connected autonomous vehicles stuff forward. So we're going to break it off into two offices. So this is kind of the way the office is kind of set up. We are called CAVX, so connected automated vehicles. And the X is all the other things that we do. So we're not just about connected automated vehicles. We're about ITS, research and development. We're about the policy side of moving these initiatives forward. Things might come into play when you hear about connected automated vehicles. People talk about electrification sometimes. People talk about mobility as a shared service. So there's models out there in the future which say, you know what, people may not own a car because this might be too expensive to own these vehicles. So it might be a shared service that you actually Uber or Lyft everywhere that you go. So those are just theories. We don't know if those theories would actually come true, but things that we're starting to think about with this process too, because that changes a lot of different dynamics. It changes the dynamics of these vehicles on the roadway. It changes dynamics of where these vehicles park and stop. Curbside space becomes a premium. So we're looking at all these different things. So how we're set up is I'm leading the office. Recently hired Kristen White as our CAV Innovation Director. So Kristen joins us from the Chief Counsel's office. She's going to be focused a lot on the policy side of things. So it's great to kind of have that legal perspective. We also have Pravina Pittaparthi. She's on a mobility. Pravina's here today in the audience. So she's a planner. So it's kind of great that we have engineering, planning, and legal all together. So Pravina is also heading policy, mostly on MnDOT strategic plan. And then Corey Johnson is still with the ITS program manager. So he's still going to have the ITS group. That includes Rashmi, Dan Rowe, and Mike Kronzer. We're also going to have a very strong tie back to the traffic office. Ray Starr has a wealth of knowledge, but Ray also had other duties he was doing too as part of the traffic office. So Ray is going to stay in traffic, but you'll see a lot of, in the future, dotted lines between our office and the traffic office as we keep the new state traffic engineer engaged, keep groups like Ken's, we'll be working closely with Ken when it comes to pavement marking, and Josie when it comes to science and all the other pieces to this puzzle. But that's kind of how we're set up. So we are going to continue to run like the Innovative Ideas program through Corey. We have some additional funding that management has given us to explore new concepts for connected and automated vehicles, new pilots, new programs, new research. So we're excited to get this office kicked off. So you heard about, I've already used the term CAV a couple different times, but you'll hear things about an autonomous vehicle or an automated vehicle or a connected vehicle. So for those of you that are kind of new to this, an autonomous vehicle is basically the vehicle can operate on its own. So it's not relying on communication with the infrastructure back and forth. It's not relying on communication from other vehicles. It can simply operate on the roadway by itself. A connected vehicle is a little bit different. There's different applications when you talk about connected vehicles. It could be what's called V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle technology. So this is where the vehicles are actually talking and communicating with each other. Give an example is, two vehicles are traveling down the roadway, coming towards the intersection. There may be an imminent crash, right? In the future, hopefully those vehicles can detect that and say, let's not collide, let's take some alternative measures. A big thing with connected vehicles you're going to see is probably truck platooning. So there's actually some states out there that have actually allowed truck platoon. So the trucks basically operate about 40 to 50 feet apart from each other. There's still a driver in each vehicle, so not driving by themselves. But the vehicles are connected through short-range radios. So when that front truck accelerates, that back truck accelerates automatically. When that front truck decelerates, the back one does it automatically. There's no human reaction time. They're linked in their data. So some states are actually doing that right now. For the trucking industry, there's a huge benefit. They're looking at 7 to 10% reductions in their fuel costs. And for an industry that operates on very small profit margins, that's a huge potential savings moving forward. But in Minnesota, there are some challenges with that. Our law right now says that trucks have to be 500 feet apart. And unless they're passing somebody, they are in a business district, or if the lane is specifically designated for truck platooning. So can we legally do truck platooning in Minnesota? We can, but only if we have like a moving lane closure going down the roadway. So we could probably do some kind of test to demonstrate the technology here in Minnesota, but we're not like some other states that basically said, yep, you can go ahead and move that technology forward. So there's an application of a vehicle to vehicle. Other applications of vehicle to vehicle would be like in the freeway in the morning when you're coming into work. You see a lot of oscillation in the traffic where some traffic is slowing down, some is starting. You're not very efficient in how our freeways move. Ideally, if those vehicles are all connected, they all kind of move in one stream together. So you don't get that oscillation effect and you can increase your capacity of your roadways. Ideally, these technologies kind of come together and you have what's called a connected automated vehicle where it's talking to other vehicles. It could be talking to infrastructure too. So it can be talking to a signal system. The car can be saying, I'm a car, I'm coming. The signal system can be saying, I'm red, you need to stop. Or I'm turning green in 5 seconds. Or here's how you should eco-drive to get to that signal system. So those are all the different pieces of the puzzle that can eventually come together. You hear about different levels of automation too. So you hear about a level 2 or level 4 or level 5. Very quickly, high overview. So level 0 is basically the driver has to do everything. You'll see some of the level 2 vehicles, the Teslas out there right now, or the GM Super Cruise, where you can actually take your hand off the wheel and the vehicle can still drive itself. That person still needs to be there to monitor the whole entire environment and take control of that vehicle if they need to. But those are more the lines of like a level 2. Level 3 is a little bit more than that, where the car can actually monitor the environment a little bit. So those are the vehicles that are kind of out on the roadway right now. Level 4s and 5 vehicles. So level 4, a lot of times these vehicles have no steering wheel and no pedals. So these vehicles are actually able to operate on their own. There's typically not a driver in the vehicle. There could be still an operator to monitor things like an airplane pilot. But these vehicles can only operate on limited routes. So if you saw in the news that we had a little shuttle here, autonomous shuttle, that was a level 4 vehicle. We went out there, we programmed the route where it could operate, and that's the route where it operated. If you got on that bus and said, take me to grandma's house, we'd say, I don't know where grandma's house is. I know my one little route, and that's it. Level 5 is kind of where everybody wants to get. This is a vehicle you can get in and say, take me here, take me there, and it'll bring you right to the doorstep of where you need to be. These vehicles are still a long ways away. There's a lot of things that have to happen with a level 5 vehicle. Pretty interesting. I was talking to somebody from IBM about a week or so ago, and they were working on a similar small shuttle project. So we have what's called the Easy Mile shuttle, and one of their competitors has a similar shuttle. And they were basically looking at mapping out the whole entire world to 10 by 10 grids. So when you got inside that vehicle, it's not take me to grandma's house, it's take me to this one spot where I can easily get off that vehicle and get inside the house. So they're looking at that from more of the disabled communities perspective. So kind of pinpoint accuracy on where that vehicle would end up. But those are kind of the levels of vehicles as you hear about some of these things. All right, so what are we looking at? We are looking at automated and connected vehicles. I talked a little bit about truck platooning. We're looking at the electrification of vehicles. So if there's a chance that, you see like what Tesla is doing, they're going more electric. Other companies are going more electric. What's the impact on how this all comes together? We're looking at automated delivery services. This is like a little cooler on wheels is what this is. So I was out at a conference. We were standing on the sidewalk, and this thing came up, and it found the pedestrians, and it weaved its way all the way through. And it's basically like you see Amazon wants to use drones. This is like a drone on wheels. So some states are actually looking at these things and allowing these things. So the question is, is this legal? Is this legal? Is this legal? Those are the pieces that we need to work out. Before we can say, yep, let's do all this stuff, there's some legal framework that goes along with this at the same time. And then I talked a little bit more about mobility as a service. This is the theory I talked about earlier with, maybe you don't own a vehicle. Maybe you just get inside an Uber or Lyft. I was talking to somebody from Lyft, and they had a great presentation at a conference I was at. And they basically said, I don't have the exact numbers on this, but they basically said for us to operate a Lyft vehicle, it's like, $2.80 a mile. For somebody who owns a vehicle, over the life of that vehicle, it's like 72 cents a mile to operate that. So they said for us, with our company vision, our goal is to make sure that we're down to the price where it's competitive for somebody who owns the vehicle. So then people will say, well, why should I buy a car when I can just take Lyft or Uber everywhere? So their goal is, by the time the technology gets to that level 5 vehicles, these can go everywhere else, they're going to start transitioning out their workforce at the same time. So by transitioning out their workforce, they can then be cost competitive by taking out the cost of the driver. So that's what Lyft is actually working on as a model. Now that scares a lot of people when you talk about the impact of autonomous vehicles on businesses and workforce. You talk about this in the trucking industry, they are scared, right? They say don't talk about automated vehicles or autonomous vehicles because we have a hard time attracting people right now to our workforce. And if you say they're all going to be autonomous in 10 years, no one's going to want to come and work for us today. So we kind of look at it as they're more of an operator, kind of like an airplane, right? So there's probably still going to be somebody inside that truck to take care of the loading, the unloading, all the checkpoints that they have to do along the way to make sure the vehicle is safe. But they're more of an operator, and they're monitoring the system like an airline pilot. Same thing with a bus driver. We still anticipate there's probably going to still be somebody in that vehicle for a long time. You look at a bus driver today, what are they doing, right? They're driving the bus, they're security, they're customer service, they're probably a tour guide to some reason. So having them maybe do less of the driving task and more of the monitoring, they can focus on those other activities instead. So the workforce piece is a big piece as we move forward. All right, the big question is, when is all this stuff going to come? So you see a lot of these headlines out there. GM start making cars without steering wheel by 2019. These are probably prototype models, not in production. Ford did say recently by 2021 they're going to have those mobility as a service vehicles ready to go, fully autonomous. There's already doing platoons out in Oregon. Uber is going to buy 24,000 autonomous vehicles from Volvo. This is on the connected vehicle side where these companies are moving forward on that B2B connection. But consumer availability and market penetration rates are totally unknown. So when are these things going to be available to buy? We don't know. How long is it going to take for these to have a substantial market penetration rate? So that's just basically how many of these vehicles will be on the road anytime soon. We don't know. It's probably going to be decades by the time these vehicles come on and fleets fully turn over, if you ever get to a fully autonomous world. So a long ways to go on where these things are going to come. But the industry, you can see, is really working hard at this. If you look at things already, there's already pieces that are out there already. The puzzle is already coming together. Adaptive cruise control, if you have this in your vehicle, that's a form of autonomy. Self-parking features have been out there for a long time. Lane departure warning systems and lane departure systems are there. GM Super Cruise and Tesla Autopilot on the freeway, you can take your hands off the steering wheel and the vehicle will stay in its lane. We actually rode in a Tesla right out here outside of Water's Edge a couple months ago, and we got on the freeway. The person we were with set the autopilot, took his hands off the wheel, and it pretty much stayed right in the middle of the lane. When you got to kind of the exit area, when there's no lane marking on that side at the exit, then the car did a little bit of a wobble, but it got back in the lane. And then when it actually came to passing a car, he put his turn signal on, the car found a gap, moved over, passed the car, put his turn signal back on, the car found the appropriate gap and got back in. So driving these things on the freeway system is something that is already occurring today. It's not that hard to do. Getting these things to operate like that in a complex urban environment where you have pedestrians and law enforcement and bicycles, that's going to be the biggest challenge. Oh, there's already some people that have included kind of V to I infrastructure pieces. Excuse me. Audi basically has a system where if they can pull information out of your central server for signals on your signal timing, they basically write some algorithms, predictive algorithms, and as you're driving down the roadway, your dashboard is going to show you a countdown to when the red's going to be gone. So you're driving down the roadway, you can see the signal system up ahead, and it's counting down, and it's pretty close in the vehicles that I saw. So they're already starting to use some of this V2I technology. And of course, there's testing going on all over the country. A lot of it is happening in those warm weather states. And that's a big concern for us because we have snow. Just what's happening on the national side of things. Blue are states that have actually passed laws, so quite a few states that actually move forward with this. They're all of different levels. You know, some states the law basically says, and the states should start looking at this and coming up with ways. Thank you. And coming up with ways to promote safe testing. Other states like Michigan and Georgia are basically saying, if you have an autonomous vehicle, you're fine to operate on our system. So they're all over the board. We are a green state, so we have an executive order that was just passed by Governor Dayton a couple months ago, and I'll go through that in a little more detail on what that actually means. So what does this all mean in Minnesota? Safety is probably the biggest one. Talking with our stakeholders around the state. You know, each year we have over 300 people that are killed on our roadways. You know, over 90% of those have some kind of human element. If you can take that risk away through autonomous vehicles, it's really going to help drive our curve of towards zero death down to zero. If you think about it, right? Autonomous vehicle doesn't drive drunk, doesn't drive distracted. It should stay in its lane a lot better. Each day I see these crash reports come in. It's a single lane departure where the car went off the roadway and either rolled or hit something. And like if that car could just stay in its lane through these driver assist pieces, we'd be saving a lot of lives along the way. We know it's probably going to change our operations. We don't really know how or where yet. You know, signal operations may change, freeway operations may change. We know there's probably going to be some infrastructure changes. What do we need to do to our signal systems? What do we need to do to our bridges to accommodate loads such as platooning? Those are just a couple big advanced questions. Regulation is big, right? We never ever contemplated autonomous and connected vehicles when our laws were written. So who can actually drive and operate these vehicles? Each day I have to run home and try to take a kid to soccer practice, right? But if I have an automated vehicle, can my 12-year-old son just get in the vehicle and say, take me to soccer practice? Right now, that probably can't happen. The disabled community is really big on this, right? They can't get a driver's license. But if they have an automated vehicle, they don't have to rely on somebody to take them to the dentist or the doctor or the grocery store. So they are really pushing hard to advance this technology. And basically, we got to change our laws to say, you know, you don't have to pass a driver's test for some of these things. You're able to operate these vehicles. Long way to go on the regulation piece. That also covers the mobility pieces with the disabled community. There's probably some business opportunities too. We were looking at what Colorado was talking about. There's the big search right now for the Amazon second headquarters. So Colorado, inside of their plan, said, you know what? Here's how autonomous and connected vehicles is actually going to help your business move things forward. So I'm not sure if that's going to weigh in on their selection or not, but they're already starting to think about how the transportation infrastructure network can actually help business opportunities. All right, snow and ice and salt, right? We talked to a lot of our people who are developing the technology, and they're very scared of snow and ice and salt. That's why you see Arizona, Nevada, Florida getting a lot of the testing. So a long ways to go, and we'll go through some examples. Other things. These are things that every time I go and talk to people or learn from our stakeholders, my head starts to explode about all the things we need to address. This is just kind of a brainstorming list, and there's a lot more beyond this too. But you know, what happens with our traffic operations? Are there more vehicles out there? Are they just kind of circulating around looking for rides like an Uber or Lyft? How does it impact our geometric design? So right now we're designing roadways for 50 to 100 years, but what does that look like 50 to 100 years from now when we have probably a huge penetration rate on on autonomous vehicles. We were working with one district a while ago, and they were building very flat side slopes. And they said, well, 50 years from now, when we build this up with an unbounded overlay, then we'll have 6-to-1 or 7-to-1 side slopes. We're like, 50 years from now, are you going to need those things? So what are some of the things that we can start doing today to address some of those long-range investments? Parking impacts, we talked about this. Is parking space going to be a premium? There's theories out there where you shouldn't build any more parking garages in urban areas because people aren't going to need to park because the car is just going to drop them off and circulate and get somebody else. Those are just, let's say, all theories that are out there right now. How do we staff for this? What does it look like to operate a system? Do we need more electrical engineers or database administrators? What do our licensing laws look like? How does it change land use and planning? If I can just get in my vehicle and not have to worry about driving, maybe I want to live farther away from the city and I can work for an hour and a half on my commute in each day. What are the pavement impacts? We did some work up at our MnDOT facility with the shuttle project, and that vehicle only moved 3 millimeters to a centimeter. So showing that to our pavement people, they're like, wow, if all these autonomous vehicles are programmed to go in this exact line, what does that do in terms of our pavement performance? They started looking at Vehicle Wander many, many, many years ago. And if you had all the vehicles operating in one single path, that's probably a 20% reduction in the service life of our pavements. So huge cost implications along with the pavement pieces. But you talk to the vehicle people about adding some wander back into their vehicle, well, then that just adds risk and liability to them. So they're like, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to put a vehicle wander in and have that liability when I can just tell it this is the exact path I want to go on? So those are the things that we're working through. Cybersecurity is huge. We talked about that vehicle that's talking to a signal system. How does it know that it's a real signal system and not a fake signal system? Or how do we know it's not it's a real car coming at us? Freight is a big one with kind of truck platooning. What happens with our signs and how we manage those? Bridge loads for platooning. Mixed traffic. We have autonomous and non-autonomous vehicles all operating in this space for a long, long, long time. So how do you get that to work? And then pavement markings. This is something that people are saying we should start doing now. I'm not quite so sure. We're still waiting to see, but we're looking at some of these things. And what does it do with our revenue? If we start going towards more electric vehicles, then we don't have that gas tax to rely on. So a lot of things to look at. So not a lot of answers, but a lot of things to look at. And that's just a partial list. So what are happening kind of at the national level? These are kind of more the traffic. There's a ton of research going on, but these are more the traffic-related things that maybe we want to talk on today. So the biggest ones are kind of the road markings for machine vision, and this report will go through a little bit. It's not done yet, but Ken and I were able to get some inside information that we'll share with you, and it might be a little scary. Dedicated lanes for priority or exclusive use by connected and autonomous vehicles. I've already been approached by people saying you should convert all your MnPass lanes to autonomous vehicle lanes. Well, there's some challenges politically with that and operationally. So those are things that are being talked about. Cybersecurity is being worked on. Data management strategies for these things. So as these vehicles are broadcasting information back, how can we harness that information for traffic operations? Do we need to install loop detectors and other detection devices when I can just use stuff the cars are radiating out? And then the impacts of connected vehicles and highway infrastructure. These are all kind of in the works, but these are just a snippet of some things happening on the national scale. All right, so this is our insider information. So Ken and I were invited as part of the ATSA National Conference to come listen to Paul Carlson, who was at TTI and kind of an expert in this area. So he's working on this report, but he wanted to share some inside information on what he thinks the report is going to contain. So this is not published at all, and some of these things are just information, not saying that we're going to do these things. Oh, so they said we should be using wide markings, right? So these cars are using cameras. So they want to be able to see those markings and differentiate these markings compared to a crack or a crack seal. So nice wide markings, what they recommended. They wanted a crisp edge so that they know for sure it's a marking and not a crack or something else. They wanted to modify the 10-to-30 ratio. We're actually a 10-to-40 ratio. So we have a 10-foot skip, and we have a 40-foot gap, and then a 10-foot skip and a 40-foot gap. So they were talking about going to 20-20, which would be major changes for us. So that might be one of their recommendations, but that's a lot more markings that we have down. It's a different technique. And then improving uniformity, especially at ramps and intersections. I talked about that Tesla where it got to the ramp area and it kind of lost that right edge line for the ramp and it kind of needed to find its way. So more uniformity across the country for ramps and intersections. Excuse me. And then standard contrast marking. They really like the contrast markings with the black on the outside of the white. So, these are things that are being pushed right now, or will possibly be pushed in the future. We got to decide how big of an investment do we want to make in these things. Is this the right way to go? One interesting fact with this, I was listening to a couple different manufacturers, and one of them said the best thing anybody can do right now is invest in your pavement markings, right? Get your pavement markings all up to speed, because we're relying on this camera vision, and that's what it's going to use. Another car manufacturer said, I am not relying on government to provide any certain infrastructure for our vehicles. Government is way too inconsistent on how they're going to install these and maintain these things. So as we're getting pushed to make these investments in pavement markings, we got to look at, is it true or is it not true? So that's the debate we're working at right now. And in California, they went to 6-inch durable pavement markings, because this is where a lot of the testing is occurring. Silicon Valley has a lot of these companies that are developing the technology. So they basically said, we're going to change our policy to 6-inch to allow for the connected vehicle world to move forward. Signs. What's the future of signs? All right, we're hearing some consistent messaging. So these vehicles use a lot of different technologies. I talked about cameras. They may use cameras to determine the lane lines. Some are using radar and LiDAR for detection. Some are using what's called artificial intelligence. So I was talking to one of the vendors for artificial intelligence and about the impacts for traffic engineering. He said, a lot of these signs, we can read these fine with artificial intelligence, right? So basically you teach the vehicle that this is what the sign is, what you need to do, right? So you show the vehicle 1 billion wrong way signs, right? Said that's a wrong way sign. And it knows that it's wrong way, I can't enter. He said it gets really goofy when we start getting into all these specialty signs, no driving in the right lane between 8 and 10 unless you're a truck with a blue license plate, right? And the vehicles can't comprehend those things. So they're talking about we need more consistent signs across the nation to make these things work. So we are working on this from a national standpoint. The AASHTO traffic engineers, along with the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, are just starting up committees to talk about connected and automated vehicles. So our first meeting is actually next week with the traffic engineers, and then in June we're meeting face-to-face with the traffic engineers and with the committee to start looking at what should some of these new standards be across the country. I already talked about machine-readable technology. They need to be able to read these things. That's actually what 3M is doing. Oops. There's an error in there with the slide. So basically what 3M is doing, that's probably why that slide got messed up, Ken. Sorry about that. So what 3M is looking at doing from science is they're embedding an infrared chip inside the sign. And they put an infrared camera inside the car. So as the car is going down the roadway, it's not reading what the sign says, it's reading the chip inside the sign. So we'll go down the roadway, this one says Super Sunday ahead. This was just a demonstration we had downtown. But it basically reads that chip and it says, okay, I can see a stop sign and it says at this coordinate there's a stop sign. So that tells the vehicle I need to stop at that location. So that's what 3M is kind of working on, is that infrared technology. And this is just kind of a display that we kind of demonstrated in downtown Minneapolis, where this is the sign down there, the camera's reading the sign, and it's displaying the sign with the location and direction that you're moving. So that's what's kind of happening on the sign side. All right, work zones. There isn't a lot there's probably stuff going on, but it's hard to tell across the country with all the things going on. But how do these vehicles operate in a work zone? How does it know there's a work zone there? And how does it make sure that it's operating safely? One thing that we are doing for a work zone is we're part of a pooled fund study with Colorado and a few other states, where it's an autonomous truck mounted attenuator. So what happens in our work zones is a lot of times that last truck gets hit a lot. So we're looking at automating that truck to some degree. So basically, there's the front truck, which is leading the way, and the back truck is communicating with that front truck. So that front truck is kind of leaving like electronic breadcrumbs, and that back truck kind of follows right along. So that truck doesn't need to have a driver in it. It can just follow along, but it still has a truck-mounted attenuator to protect that work zone. So one thing that we're looking at for work zones, hopefully we can bring that product here to Minnesota next summer. So that pool fund is just starting to get kicked off. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about connected vehicles. So just something that are happening on the national level. There's 3 major federally funded projects with connected vehicles. One is New York City. So they have what's called the complex urban environment. So how do we get these things to talk in those areas where it's hard with the tall buildings? So they're doing a bunch of different things with V2I. They're looking at red light violation, speed compliance. So if you start going over the speed limit, it's going to warn the driver that you're over the speed limit. It's going to warn oversized vehicles. There's some V2V technology, some blind spot warnings, emergency electronic brake lights. So if that vehicle in front brakes, it's going to brake automatically. Forward crash warnings. Those are just warnings to the driver that you're about to crash. So those are things that are kind of being happening in New York City. So that's kind of, then also Wyoming is an interesting case. So they're looking at 402 miles of Interstate 80. So in a 1 year span, they had 1,600 crashes, 1,500 hours of road closure, and 18 fatalities. So they're looking at how can we get more information out to those drivers, especially those truck drivers. So when there's an incident ahead, that you're able to relay that information back. So sometimes they're relaying it back through signs, sometimes they're relaying it back through other vehicles. So they can relate road conditions, incidents, parking, road closures. There's also the stress notifications. So if a vehicle is off the roadway, they can notify other vehicles around them that, hey, I need some help. Can you come help me? They're also looking at some work zone warnings. So up ahead if there are lane closures or lane shifts. So a big project happening out in Wyoming, kind of more the rural environment. And Tampa is more your urban freeways and transit. So we're looking at some wrong-way driving, intersection movement assist, how to get through intersections a little more efficiently, some transit signal priorities, some pedestrians within the crosswalk warning. So they're kind of just getting going in Tampa Bay to move some connected vehicle technology. So those are like the three big national projects that are being done right now. Other states are all doing other things too. Michigan is doing a lot with signal systems and trying to get that technology out where the cars can actually start to read signal systems. We're doing that same thing too. So the federal AASHTO put out a challenge to all the states by 2020 that you're going to have 20 intersections filled with or that are broadcasting SPAT. So signal phasing and timing. So this is basically you're broadcasting out, I'm red, I'm red, I'm red, or now I'm yellow, I'm yellow, I'm yellow, and now I'm green. So it's broadcasting out to those vehicles. And what kind of spurred this is kind of the chicken and the egg thing, right? So the car manufacturers were saying, well, I'm not going to put this technology in my car if I know I can't have any infrastructure to read. And the states basically said, I'm not going to install this infrastructure if there's no cars out there. So what AASHTO says is we're going to make a dedication to the industry to let them know that we're serious about this. And we're actually going to outfit 20 intersections with the signal phasing and timing. So we're working on this right away. The ones in green are the ones that kind of are in process right now. The ones in blue are actually up and running. So what it uses is kind of short-range DSRC. It's called short-range communications. It basically is just broadcasting out little messages in each direction of what the signal phasing and timing is. All right, so we are looking at this too. We're going to respond to the SPAT challenge. We're going to learn from this and what we can and can't do and what we can actually do with the data. And then we're looking at kind of sharing that data to a lot of other individuals along the way. So our corridor that we're looking at right now is on the right hand of the screen is downtown Minneapolis, and then the west is moving out through Golden Valley, through Plymouth, out to Wayzata. So we're looking at Highway 55, instrumenting all those signal systems on Highway 55, and also looking at kind of 394 corridor. So we're going to have kind of a signalized corridor and a freeway segment that we're going to outfit with this technology. And I'll go through exactly what we're going to be working on. So the first thing is that signal phasing and timing. So we're going to meet that SPAT challenge. So we'll be able to start broadcasting those messages. We're also looking at vehicle pedestrian conflict warnings. So in some of those areas, we have a lot of pedestrians in the area. So how can we get information back to drivers that there's a pedestrian inside the crosswalk that they need to be aware of? If you look at our fatalities over the last 10, 15 years, our car and truck related fatalities have really dropped off, but our pedestrian fatalities are really flat. They're about 40 a year. So how can we change the needle on reducing those pedestrian fatalities? We're also going to look at snowplow signal priority. So I was talking about the signal systems are broadcasting out the SPAT, but there are not a lot of cars out there that actually can read that information yet. That's still a little ways to go. So what we're looking at doing is outfitting our snowplows as kind of those test vehicles. So late at night, instead of having to come up to that signal system and stop, they can actually call that signal system and say, I'm a snowplow, I'm coming. Can you turn green for me? So it's not going to be preemptive like an emergency vehicle where it's going to change automatically. It's going to be priority. So if it's rush hour, it's probably going to say, hey, it's rush hour. We're not going to give the snowplow a priority. But if it's off peak and there's no other emergency vehicles in the area, maybe we'll turn that light green for you. You can go right through the intersection. So things that will help kind of show that technology can actually work. We're also going to have some mobile work zone warnings. So as our vehicles are out there and they're working on the roadway, it's automatically going to populate that DMS sign that says there's either snowplow operations ahead, or there's a work zone ahead, or there's a lane closed ahead. So instead of having to send information back to the RTMC and have it posted, these vehicles, when they're out there, will automatically populate that sign. When they leave, it automatically takes the sign down. So another application. We're also looking at connected vehicle data management. So I talked about this earlier where the cars are actually broadcasting what's called a basic safety message. So they're saying, here's who I am, here's the direction that I'm going. So how can we harness that data? What can we use with that data? Now there's an enormous amount of data that probably comes with this. So what can we do to maybe determine queue length in work zones, or help with our traffic operations, or get rid of some of our detection devices that we have out there right now? This is a big one too that I really like, is the third-party traffic signal data sharing. So how can we get our data pushed out for third-party vendors to use? So having government try to solve all these things is going to be a huge challenge and a huge cost, right? But how can I get this out there for a Google or a Waze, or I talked about those other companies that already embedded their information in an Audi vehicle? How can we get the information to them so they can start using that information and build their own platforms for customers? So there's a company out there where right now, if you can get signal timing data out to them, I talked about the Audi vehicle, they actually have an app too. So you can put the app, it's basically a speedometer, and it's going to show you if I drive in the green area, I'm going to arrive on green. If I drive in red, I'm going to arrive on red. So you can actually get some eco-driving today out of these systems. I grew up in Green Bay, and how people drive in Green Bay is they hit the gas and they go flying up to the next red light, right? They stop. Then the light turns green, and they slam on the gas and they go up to the next red light. Not very eco-friendly, right? But if you have that speedometer that says, you know what, it doesn't pay for me to jam on the gas and go up there 50 miles an hour. If I drive at 35, I'm going to go right through that green light when I get there. So those are some cool things we can actually do from an eco-driving perspective. All right, our schedule, we'll actually probably have that SPAT corridor up and running by this fall is our goal. Ideally, most of this is going to be happening probably towards the end of 2019, where all 6 applications are going to be running. But that SPAT corridor should be up and running by the fall. Oh. All right, I already talked about truck platooning a little bit. This is just kind of our law that says that you have to be 500 feet apart, or if there's a special lane closure. So platooning, we are looking at doing maybe some kind of demonstration with our friendly states to the west, where part of it's called the Northwest Passage. So from Minnesota to Washington State, trying to do some multi-state truck platoon. All right, some of the policy activities. I already talked about the CAVX office. We are working with the Center for Transportation Studies to develop a visioning workshop. We could just start jumping in and doing a million different things, right? I talked about all the different challenges that are up there that we need to work on, but we need to be more strategic. And a big question that's being asked from our customers is, all right, MnDOT, you're doing something, but what does that do for the greater good of Minnesota? So next month, we're going to bring in about 80 leaders from around the state. We're going to have business and law enforcement and government and advocacy groups and specialists in this area to figure out what should Minnesota focus on to improve the quality of life for Minnesotans. So it's not just about getting the vehicles on the roadway, but what can we do for the disabled community? What can we do in terms of equity? What can we do to address law enforcement concerns? What can we do to help grow the economy? So those are things that we're looking at. I'll talk a little bit about Executive Order 1804 and some other things that we're doing here. All right, so we are in the process of putting together a strategic vision or a strategic plan for MnDOT, and Pravina is working on this. So from a long-range perspective, our 20-year plan, we should start looking at those investment things right now. So we're going to be looking at a bunch of different scenarios. For example, how fast do the vehicles start coming in? Is it that mobility as a shared service option? What are some of the other things that could possibly influence how this operates in our system? We're looking at what are our capital needs. Do I need to be putting fiber optic everywhere? Do I need to be investing in more signs with the 3M technology? Do I need to be investing in better pavement markings? What research we should be conducting? What should we specialize in? What partners should we be partnering with? I mean, how often does a DOT talk to a car manufacturer? We talk to them kind of all the time now. We're talking to the Teslas and the Audis and the Fords, trying to get their perspectives. What needs to happen in terms of our regulation? How do these change the operation of our system? How do we staff for this? What's the impact of multimodal? And how do we communicate all this stuff with the public? Well, AAA did a study not too long ago, about a year and a half ago, and 71% of Americans were afraid to ride in an automated vehicle. So we're getting all excited about it, right? But the public is like, wait a second, I am not quite ready for this. So the recent survey has brought that down to about 63%. but that's still 2/3 of Americans are afraid to ride in an automated vehicle. So what generation do you think is the most afraid? Generation X. Oh, my generation is the most afraid. Baby boomers are a little bit, are very close to us, and the millennials are about 50-50. Oh, so there's a long ways to go. But about half Americans are really looking forward to having this technology in their next car. So there's a comfort level on how fast we can actually go with getting public acceptance. You see what happened in Arizona where we had the Tesla crash where it hit that bicyclist. Those are big things where they get a lot of national attention, right? So the public, when they see those, immediately says, whoa, somebody was killed by an automated vehicle or autonomous vehicle. So we need to be a little more calculated in our approach. But at the same time, you don't hear about the other 40,000 people who died on our roadways that year. So they get a lot of national attention, and we need to be cognizant of that as we start to develop policies and procedures. All right, so the executive order, what does this actually do? It creates an enormous amount of work for us. It's probably the biggest thing, and I'll go through that in a little bit. But we want to basically be preparing for this technology. So we didn't want to jump. The governor said, I'm not going to jump right into a law. I'm just not going to do that like other states. We're going to be more strategic about this and look at our laws and see what we can actually do. But it also requires us to develop programs for testing and deployment. So the governor has been very clear to us about, yes, we're going to be cautious, but at the same time, I want to be able to test and deploy these vehicles on our roadway. So this might be a little bit hard to see, but there's basically an advisory council. These are all appointed directly by the governor himself, 13 members, and it's a wide cross-section of business and legal and disabled community and advocacy and technology people and car people. So they're looking at what should be the vision for Minnesota moving forward. We have what's called an ICAV team, which is we're working very closely with our sister agencies. We're working very closely with Department of Public Safety on vehicle registration and licensing. We're working with the State Patrol on what's legal and not legal to operate on a roadway. Insurance is a big piece. Somebody gets in a crash with this, but who's actually responsible, right? Is it the person who's in the vehicle? Is it the person who said, here's where I want to go? Is it the software provider who actually runs the technology? Is it the car manufacturer? So a lot of questions on insurance and liability are with this piece too. So we're working with Department of Commerce, Department of Agriculture is involved, DEED from an economic development standpoint. So a lot of these sister agencies are working together to figure out what can we do from a regulatory side to make this work. And the policy, what the advisory or the executive order basically says is by December 1st, MnDOT, you're the lead with your other state agencies and the advisory council, and you need to involve stakeholders, but we need to recommend changes in policy and regulation in all these different areas. So transportation infrastructure, cybersecurity and data privacy, vehicle registration, driver training, and licensing. So driver training is a big piece too, right? What can the vehicle do and what can't the vehicle do? So you look at like a Tesla, somebody could get in there and say, the car can drive itself. I'm just going to hit autopilot and go. Well, you probably shouldn't do that when it's icy out, black ice conditions, snowing, right? So there's a big education piece too. Insurance, traffic regulations, economic development, workforce development, accessibility and equity. These cars, not everybody can afford a Tesla or a Cadillac. So how can we make sure that this technology can be used by all? And then how do we deal with the policy and planning perspective? So that's an enormous amount of work that we have to do. And we have to engage stakeholders in all these different areas across the state. So that's probably a big task that we're working on. So if you have a huge interest in this, in one of these areas, contact us, and we'll be engaging you through a stakeholder process. So the stakeholders will basically be feeding information back to us, saying, here's what we should be working on. Those then go in the final report back to the legislature by December 1st. That's just basically the program for testing. All right, so we've already done a little bit of autonomous vehicles. Anybody get a chance to ride the little shuttle that we had? Few of you. All right, so it's called Mini. So it's an electric shuttle. Top speed was only 25 miles an hour, but it's a level 4 vehicle, right? So if you got inside this vehicle, it had no steering wheels and no pedals. We could program it on different routes, and we had multiple goals with this project. One was to do some snow and ice testing. So we had it up at our MnDOT facility, ran it through a series of tests. Had a great winter to do that. We wanted to look at what do we need to have for infrastructure to operate these vehicles. What happens with the operational impacts? So somebody said, why didn't you just pick a snowplow, right? Why did you pick a bus? Because MnDOT doesn't really own or operate buses. But we learned a lot by having like a third party identify some of the challenges. So kind of a little funny story is we just got this project kicked off, and we were sitting down with the commissioner and Sue Mulvihill and the team, and they said, okay, the first thing we need to do is go and talk to our communications people and get a communication strategy ready to go. And we should also go talk to our friends at Met Transit to make sure that they know what's going on, that we have a bus, and that this is what we're actually looking at doing. We're not really testing it from a transit perspective. We're kind of testing the technology, and this is just kind of the vehicle to test the technology. So as we're having this discussion, we got research money to do this. Research Services put up on their website, hey, we're doing this autonomous shuttle project. So we had no clue that TV stations and radio stations actually looked at the research website. So right away the phone starts to ring, right? Before we have our communication plan even set to go. So what do you think the first questions were from the media about this project? Why are you taking bus drivers' jobs away from them, right? So nothing at all to do with we're testing the technology. It's about snow and ice. It's about our infrastructure. It's immediately about jobs, 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 jobs. So we learned a lot right from the first day. So how can we improve those mobility for the disabled? How can we increase Minnesota's influence? Laws are being passed around the country. Laws are being discussed at the federal level and rules and regulations. So we want to be part of that conversation at the same time. Who should we be partnering with? And then how do we get that public feedback to see what their comfort level is? So this is a little bit about that vehicle wander. This thing was super, super accurate. Mike Kronzer is here. He was a great project manager on this job. But you can see in the snow that that vehicle stayed in the exact track every single time. So it was super accurate where it would actually stay. So basically some of the findings, we learned that on a snow-covered roadway, this vehicle actually worked fairly well. It doesn't use cameras. It uses LiDAR and GPS to figure out where it is. So LiDAR is kind of like lasers, kind of like a radar. So use those for kind of localization to figure out where it was at. So if the road's covered with snow, it operates just fine, right? But the challenges came when it was a blowing snow, right? So there's things that are going in front of these sensors, and it doesn't know if it's a car, if it's a human, if it's a dog, what it is. So the vehicle the first couple of days would just stop when it saw a snowflake. It got a lot better over time. Because we were working closely with our vendor, they were actually able to call up their programmers in France and change their algorithms to make it operate a little bit better. Is it perfect? Can it operate in any snow condition? No, it can't at all. But I think we made some great strides from an industry perspective on getting it to recognize those snow conditions. So it did detect when it was on ice a little bit and slowed down. It was a little more cautious. We put pedestrians out in front of it. We put bikes out in front of it. We put vehicles out in front of it. And it comes to a nice kind of controlled stop. We had it down at the state capitol, and there was a bunch of kids, like 5,000 kids that day, protesting guns in schools. Before the big group showed up, the vehicle was on one path, and there were a bunch of kids coming up kind of a diagonal path. And they kind of ran, where they're going to be intersecting each other. And there were a group of kids in front of the bus, and there was the bus, and there was a group of kids behind the bus. And the bus just kind of went right along with the pace of the kids that were walking. So it kind of recognized that there were things around it. Once you got within about 5 feet of the bus, it would kind of recognize that there's something really close, and it would kind of slow down and adjust. So it kind of moved right along with the students as they walked up the sidewalk. So it was very responsive to those things that were at or near the bus. You got within about 2 feet of the bus, and it would stop. So great technology in making some movements forward. So kind of wrapping up here. Wrapping up here. We had it downtown Minneapolis. Week of the Super Bowl, we had about 1,300 people ride it over 3 days. It's been at the state capitol for a demonstration. It's been down at Rochester at the Mayo Clinic area. It's been out at Hennepin County on the Greenway. It's been at the University of Minnesota for a couple days. It's in North Dakota now. Am I missing any places, Mike?
No, that's it.
So about 3,000 riders on the vehicle. National Federation for the Blind was out there, and Mike did a great job of showing them the technology in downtown Minneapolis. They absolutely loved it. They basically were saying, we can't wait for this technology to come. We are looking at some testing corridors too along the way. Oh, by the way, on the downtown, we actually did a survey, kind of like AAA survey. And after people rode the vehicle and got a comfort level, about 83% said they were comfortable with the technology. So, AAA says, most of them are not comfortable. Once they actually experience the vehicle and see the vehicle and touch the vehicle, a lot bigger comfort level. And to wrap up, we are looking at some testing corridors. So MnDOT is a great place to test. But we also have maybe Camp Ripley, and maybe there's some northern test facilities up north where they actually test private vehicles in snow and ice. So we're looking at how can we get people to come here and do some more testing that's not open to the general traffic. And then looking at what we can actually do on our public roadways. So defining what those legal bounds are today that we can actually do some testing. And that's what I have. Oh, so I covered a lot of information, but we're excited. It's really a cool spot to be in, but we have a ton of work to do. Ken.
Speed limits.
Yep.
Just a question. Autonomous vehicles, will they be programmed to follow the speed limit, or will they have a slush factor?
That's a good question. The Tesla that I rode in had a slush factor of 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. But that would be the big thing, is how are those vehicles programmed to operate at the speed limit or above the speed limit?
So it probably measured how traffic is flowing around it, and then also the speed limit, and that would adapt to that?
It would not go above that programmed amount. The Tesla would not go above that programmed amount. But that's how he was able to pass the cars in the freeway, is he was in that right lane, he was doing about the speed limit. Then when he got in the left lane, the car said, okay, I can go up to 10 miles an hour more, and I can pass that vehicle. So I think he might have been doing it just to kind of show how he could pass a vehicle. So.
There was some possibility mentioned somewhere about testing at 3M. Is that something that may happen, could happen, will happen, or was that just a wild rumor?
Testing at 3M?
Right.
The shuttle was at
the campus.
Oh, the shuttle was at 3M. That's one spot I missed. It was at the 3M campus. So that vehicle is actually not able to operate on a public roadway anywhere unless you get federal special exemptions.
I understand that. Like I said, I just wanted to, there was talk about it being done at the 3M campus.
Yes, that's
I
one.
haven't heard anything about it.
That's one spot I missed, was at 3M campus for several days. So we can't just take this vehicle and put it on any roadway. It doesn't pass federal crash standards yet. So some of these vehicles are starting to operate on public roadways through an exemption process. So in Las Vegas, they're operating one of these similar vehicles. Of course, the first day they had it out there, somebody backed into the vehicle. The vehicle stopped, and the car continued to back into it, and it caused a crash. And of course, it gets national attention, right? Autonomous vehicle crashes. Well, the vehicle did everything right. The human driver is the one that really messed up, but everybody starts to freak out about autonomous vehicles. So they're operating in Las Vegas, limited right now. And then in California, they got an exemption to start operating on some limited public roadways.
I have a question online. What kind of routable network was the autonomous bus using?
Routable network?
Yeah.
So they map it. So they can basically hand drive the vehicle with like a joystick. So they map it with GPS, and then it uses LiDAR for some other localization. So MnDOT was actually too rural. There's not a lot of localization pieces. So we actually had to drive, post was every 100 feet.
Yep.
Every 100 feet, we had to kind of drive like a signpost, so the vehicle knew those localized elements to stay on the correct path. So it's kind of a combination of GPS, where we train the route basically by driving with a joystick. Then it learns the route, and then LiDAR for additional localization. So hopefully that answers the question. Anything else, Mike, on that?
No, I think that's about
Okay.
it. Have you modeled truck platooning in HCS or any kind of traffic stop?
We have not modeled any truck platooning pieces, no. So basically what truck platooning is, right, so how we're probably looking at 2 vehicles in a platoon and not probably a long string. But there's concerns too about how the vehicles merge on and off when there's a truck platoon on the roadway. How does law enforcement know that they're actually platooning and not just driving really close? So there's a lot of work to do on the truck platooning side. So if we did pass a law, the law would be basically by permit only. So we would only say, somebody would have to approach us and say, I want a truck platoon, then we look at that route and look at is it safe or not, where they're going to operate before we actually move forward. The truck platooning, so Peloton is actually developing that technology, and they basically geofence routes where they allow the vehicles to operate. And not any truck can just truck platoon. So they have certain safety standards where before you can even buy the technology to put on your truck has to have a certain type of braking technology, and there's like 8 other things that have to go along with it. And they actually then control who gets hooked up from their central office. They hook up all those trucks. So a truck will call out and say, I want a platoon, and then they'll find another truck that wants a platoon, and they'll hook those 2 up. And if it's bad weather, Peloton actually says, it's bad weather in Minnesota, we're not going to allow you to platoon. So their business model is not only about the technology, it's also about the service of hooking up the vehicles and operating those in a safe environment.
Another question about the route networks is, you said, are all the car companies developing their own routing networks, or are they sharing any of their data together? And a follow-up, is there any way MnDOT could utilize these routable networks in the future?
I have not heard of any collaboration along the automobile manufacturers. I think it's very, very competitive right now. There's different theories of what they're using. Some are looking at high definition mapping. We've been approached about should we develop all of MnDOT's network as a high definition map. We don't want to get into that business at all. So we're not hearing a lot of collaboration on the technology side of things with the car manufacturers. When it comes to the data sharing piece, I'll give you an example. I was at a meeting and I was sitting at a table with Tesla and the insurance industry. So the insurance industry is having a hard time saying, I have a hard time setting a rate on this, right? So I'm going off a little bit track, but I'll come back. So I know exactly what it costs for a 16-year-old boy in, Golden Valley, Minnesota to insure. I have no clue what it costs to insure an automated vehicle. So they said, we need information from the automobile manufacturers. The guy from Tesla says, do you have any clue how much data our vehicle is producing a day? Any guess? 4 terabytes of data a day. So there's an enormous amount of data that's coming off the vehicles. What Tesla is basically saying, it's not like you can just download a spreadsheet of this stuff. It's zeros and ones and a bunch of different information. So what we want to do is harness not the vehicle data in that terms, but more of like the basic safety message that hopefully the car manufacturers will have in the future that basically says, I'm a vehicle, I'm heading in this direction at this speed. That's the kind of data that we want to be able to harness in the future. And we actually have some research projects going on now at both a national level and a state level to figure out how can we harness that information. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. But in terms of the manufacturers, they are very secretive on information sharing. All right, Jeff.
You don't know much about the truck platooning, or?
A little bit about truck platooning.
Do they try to match up like loads, or do they take the load that's in the truck into account?
No, it's just kind of the route and the vehicle. So, their model is looking at how can we, the presentation that I went to is basically trying to find ways to optimize that route for the person. So they're looking at not only the platooning piece, but how can we actually do route optimization where that guy doesn't need to be on the road for 3 to 6 weeks. So mostly like a sharing of information of who's driving where to help out with those things. But no, they're not considering what type of load. Well, I understand not what type of load it is. Just the vehicle has the features. It's been approved by that company to operate, and they just look for where they're going and how can they hook up together.
I'm just curious, because if your first truck in line is carrying just the standard loads, say a load in a grocery store,
Yep.
the second truck in line is a tanker, that second truck's not going to stop as fast as that first truck in a panic stop.
Yeah, there's a little bit of there's a 40 to 50 foot cushion. But remember, it's using vehicle technology. You're not using the human reaction time. But there's the inertia momentum pieces that. Yep. Ken.
Related to work zones, is there any, speaking of the chicken and egg business that you talked a little bit earlier, is the automotive industry waiting for the states to kind of get together to figure out how to deal with autonomous vehicles in work zones? Because we're going to always have pavement markings in work zones.
Yep.
Unless we remove the pavement markings, and we only do that for long-term work zones. So how does that work? Are they going to recognize drums and cones, and if they get blown, all that type of stuff? Has anyone started looking into that?
Not that I know about. I'm sure there people are out there looking at. The automobile manufacturer now are just trying to tackle the low-hanging fruit, right? It's the rural freeways, good weather. So these are some of the challenges that are going to come in. The urban environments, the work zones, the cold weather are all pieces of the puzzle. This is where I think maybe Minnesota's niche could be, is let's focus on cold weather and work zones and see if we can be a state to help advance that technology. So that's where we're hoping to go with this thing, is finding those markets to help out the industry. I'm not hearing a ton. I don't know if you're hearing anything on your side.
That's why I was curious.
I don't hear a ton on the work zone side. Besides, 3M had their infrared technology. They put that in a work zone in Michigan, but that's not really an automated vehicle navigating a work zone. There is actually a neat, not a neat video, but a scary video of a Tesla. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but it's following that edge line, and there's a work zone barricade right on the edge of the line. So there's not a temporary line that goes around the barricade. So the vehicle is following the line and it runs right into a barricade. So example of how the technology needs to advance further.
You haven't talked much about sort of that long-range planning element.
Yep.
Do you plan on your group doing any forecasting? There's been, we've done some attempts with like travel demand forecasting for the I-94 project to develop some assumptions of what autonomous vehicles might mean to demand, capacity, headway, speed, things of that nature. And it's all about the assumption, but are you guys planning on doing anything?
Probably not on the modeling piece itself. That was part of a proposal that came in. We decided we're not going to go down that road yet until we kind of figure out what those potential. We're going to go through scenario planning first. So there's the FHWA came with 6 different scenarios on how fast penetrations are going to be. Those will be part of the long-term planning scenarios that Pravina will be working on, and mostly in conjunction with our planning office, but not any modeling at this point in time. Oh. All right.
Well,
I spoke fast and about a lot of stuff. So
and we have gone up to our limit for the meeting, so instead of me coming up there, I'd just like to thank everyone for being able to make it, thank the people online, and if you'd help me thank Jay for presenting this stuff. And we'll see you next month.
All right. Thank you very much.
Before you do that, I'm going to copy that over.
Oh, yes. Yep.